the way to bring learning back into the classroom, the way to make sure that schools are responsive to the needs of the children they have in their classroom is to give parents more power, more control over their own children's schools.
But the voucher idea is growing in some states. Florida, where we saw Governor Jeb Bush earlier tonight, started one just last week.
The voters want a diversity of options. They don't just want either public or private. They want a whole plethora of options.
All children are precious and all children are different. And what is right for one child won't be for another. Let's trust the parents to figure out which is which.
West Virginia legislature passed a bill creating an education savings account program.
State leaders are calling it the most expansive education savings program in the nation.
Freedom protects diversity of all of these different expressions of people's individuality. It produces the great achievements of civilization, and that provides the great hope and protection of our freedom.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first ever Education Freedom Summit held in Northwest Iowa. Thanks for taking time out of your schedule to come today. Today is a historic day here, and we gather for a fantastic opportunity. This is an exciting time to serve in Christian schools in Iowa. Governor Kim Reynolds recently became the first governor in the nation to sign the Education Freedom Pledge. And that pledge states, I pledge to support policies that promote parental rights in education and educational freedom. This includes the right of parents to voice their opinions at school board meetings and to take their children's taxpayer-funded education dollars to the education providers of their choosing, whether it be a public, private, charter, or home school. You're here today, I believe, because you support that pledge. Today is an opportunity to educate and mobilize friends of the school choice movement in Northwest Iowa. Now is the time to unite to advance the mission of Christian education. Our intent for this summit is to bring awareness and excitement around the topic of school choice and ESAs, and to learn how to better advocate for these opportunities. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us as we seek to do what's best for our students and families. We appreciate each of you very much. We're excited to have several speakers here today joining us to learn more about school choice and advocate for it. I would like to also take time to recognize some honored guests who are joining us here today. When I say your name, would you please stand? Timothy Van Solen, the director of the Center for the Advancement of Christian Education. Walt Rogers, former education chair of the Iowa House of Representatives, currently deputy director of the Iowans for Tax Relief Foundation. Representative Skylar Wheeler of the Iowa House. Senator Jeff Taylor of the Iowa Senate, Eric Goranson, lobbyist for the Iowa Association of Christian Schools, Lydia Quick, Executive Director of the Iowa Association of Christian Schools. If you are a school administrator or a school leader, please stand as well so we can thank you. If you are a school board member or a trustee, please stand as well. Let's thank these people for joining us here today. Now we'll be led in devotions by Mr. Brad Biss.
Thank you, Josh. Brad Biss, here I am in my first year, Director of Mission Advancement here at Western Christian High School. And on behalf of everyone at Western, welcome. We're glad that you're taking the time for this important event and this important time in school choice. So for devotions, I was reflecting on many things, but I reflected on some events in history. When I was a child, my mother and I shared a love for history. And she actually told me that when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, she remembered exactly where she was. She was 9 years old, coming in from recess, and she was hanging up her coat on the coat rack when she heard that John F. Kennedy was assassinated. That day was Friday, November 22, 1963. That happened at 12:30 p.m. I was always amazed that that had that big an impact that she could remember exactly where she was. But this became a reality for me on Tuesday, September 11, 2001. At 8:46, you may recall, a.m., a plane flew into one of the Trade Center towers. I recall being in the staff room at Rock Valley Christian and a staff member coming in and informing all of us of that news. I could go to the staff room at Rock Valley Christian and sit in the exact chair where I heard that news. Today, I'm wondering, do you remember where you were on Sunday, March 15, 2020? Some of you are nodding. Can anyone just shout out what happened on Sunday, March 15, 2020? It was on that evening that Governor Reynolds proclaimed that schools would be closed for 4 weeks in the state of Iowa. I was on my way home from a chamber singers concert. Western Christian had performed at Inwood CRC. And on my way home, my phone lit up like a Christmas tree. I went to Rock Valley Christian and I frantically paced up and down the halls, calling board members. Some of you, Todd, I think you were one that I called. You probably remember this. About what are our next plans and steps going to be? As you know, this brought up many, many questions, which we had to deal with immediately. How are we going to implement distance learning? Will parents pay tuition when kids aren't in school? What if our families lose employment? How are we going to make payroll? What about the next school year? Will we lose families? How about our community and church support? What about all the fundraisers that we do? What if school closure continues into the next year? We are 21 months removed from March 15, 2020. And yes, unfortunately, we are still dealing with the pandemic, and I don't want to minimize that at all. But did any of you see the 180 that came out of this for us as Christian schools? All these questions have turned into opportunities. Many of these questions have now become blessings. And that's why we're here today. I couldn't be more surprised at the outcome from where we were March 15, 2020. I've sat in many, many church services where the pastor has ended with Ephesians 3, verse 20. Now it has new meaning for me. Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to the power that has worked within us, to him be the glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations. I think what has happened in the past 21 months is more than what we probably could imagine. I've reflected on Proverbs 3, verse 5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. There's many things that have happened the past 21 months that I don't understand. But we continue to trust in the Lord. How about Romans 8, verse 28? And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. That verse has new meaning for me now. Everyone, God is calling us to love him, to trust him, to be faithful, and he will do more than we can ever imagine. And he has called us at this time and place to be leaders in his kingdom. Romans 13, verse 1. For there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. You are here today because you are an authority, either in our government, locally, school board, Christian education, principal, administrator, whatever role you're playing. You are one of those authorities that have been established at this time by our God. In closing, another little question here. 16 years ago, school leaders gathered at the Western Christian cafeteria. Mr. Kramer, where is Mr. Kramer? Mr. Kramer, do you remember why we gathered 16 years ago at the Western Christian cafeteria? The state of Iowa had passed STO legislation. School tuition organizations were to be formed. And we decided to form one in Northwest Iowa. It was called NICSTO. Being principal at Rock Valley Christian at that time, our allotment, that money that we had to raise, was $22,000. And I looked at Mr. Kramer and I thought, I don't think I can do this. And he said to me, yes, you can. This is going to be an incredible opportunity for our schools. You see, I was leaning on my own understanding, and of course, Mr. Kramer was trusting in the Lord. On a side note, many of our schools from Northwest Iowa had to return $22,000 or more this year because we had too much money for our STO. Correct, Mr. Kramer? So here we are. The possibility of new legislation maybe seems like a long shot, but who are we to question what God has in store for us and our schools? Trust in the Lord and lean on not our own understanding. Will you pray with me? Our Father in heaven, we come before you today. And Lord, first of all, I want to just pause and give you thanks and praise for the season that was just completed, this Advent and Christmas season, Lord, in which we reflect on your incredible plan of salvation. Lord, we are so humbled that you call us your children. We're so humbled that you sent your Son to enter this world, to die for us, so that we can have eternal life. Lord, today as we gather as school leaders, as people who are concerned about the future of Christian education, Lord, we just first of all thank you for being a faithful and incredible God. Lord, as we reflected on today that these past nearly 2 years have been difficult, but yet you have worked your plan through the difficulty. And Lord, even through these difficult times, you have blessed our schools in numerous and countless ways. So I praise you, Lord, for that. Today, Lord, I ask that your name may be praised and honored in the classrooms of every school that are represented here today. Lord, be with our teachers and be with our students. May you be honored, but also promoted. And may you, Lord, work in the hearts of our young people so that they may become a generation that knows you, honors you, and serves you. Lord, I pray for the leaders in this room. We reflected that each has been called at this time to be a leader in your kingdom. Give us wisdom and discernment. We ask that for our legislators as they anticipate another session. So, Lord, bless our time here today. In your Son's name, amen.
Thank you, Mr. Biss. Our first speaker is Corey Deangelis. Corey is quite possibly the best known and most active national school choice advocate and voice. He's the National Director of Research at the American Federation for Children, the Executive Director at Educational Freedom Institute, an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute, and a senior fellow at the Reason Foundation. He was named on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list for his work on educational policy. Deangelis has authored or co-authored over 40 journal articles, book chapters, and reports on educational policy. He's the co-editor of the book School Choice Myths, Setting the Record Straight on Educational Freedom. He's a regular on Fox News, Newsmax, and has been published in the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, the New York Post, and National Review. We're thankful that he is able to join us here today. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Corey Deangelis.
Thanks for your patience, everybody. Technology is a wonderful thing when it works. Quick shout out to our student-run tech team up in the booth. You guys feel free to yell at me from up there if you need me to do anything, okay? Still quiet. How we doing, Hayden? Thank you. Try a couple more things.
Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. It works? All right, boom. Okay, cool. I'll try to go through this pretty quickly so I don't take up too much time, but feel free to cut me off if I go over. Just let me know. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. I'm glad we were able to fix the technical issues pretty quickly. I'm Corey Deangelis, and look, this is the greatest time to be a school choice advocate. There is so much momentum all across the nation to fund the student directly as opposed to the buildings. We're calling 2021, just last year, the year of school choice because 19 states, including Iowa, either enacted new programs or expanded existing programs to fund students as opposed to systems. And support nationwide has jumped at least 10 percentage points since April of 2020 in support of school choice, from 64% support nationwide to 74% support in June of 2021, according to the latest Real Clear Opinion Research polling. And in Iowa, polling from EdChoice has found that education savings accounts are highly favored by parents. Over 70% of Iowa parents support the concept of education savings accounts, which were considered in Iowa just last year and made it through the Senate, but did not get a full House vote and pass through the House. So I think we have even more momentum this year than we had last year, especially because parents all across the country and in the state of Iowa are figuring out that there isn't any good reason to fund buildings when you can fund students directly instead. And look, your governor, Governor Reynolds, has pushed for education savings accounts, has been a huge advocate, has pushed for in-person learning all across the state of Iowa, and has been a huge champion of educational freedom, and even being the first and at the moment the only governor to sign the Education Freedom Pledge. If people in the audience want to see what that is, you can go to educationfreedompledge.com, but it's the concept of supporting the idea that the money should follow the child to wherever they get an education. That could be the public school. If that works best for you, if you like your public school, you can keep your public school. But if not, the money should follow the child to a private school or charter school or some type of homeschooling option, because after all, education funding is supposed to be meant for educating children, not for propping up and protecting a particular institution. And just think about it. We already do this with so many other taxpayer-funded initiatives. When it comes to higher education, we have the Pell Grant for low-income students, for example, or the GI Bill for veterans. The money doesn't go straight to the community college regardless of the choice of the family or of the student. Instead, the money goes to the student, and then they have a choice in the matter. They can take the money to the community college if they want, but they could also take that funding to a private religious or non-religious university if that's the best fit for them. The money follows the decision of the student. We do the same thing with pre-K programs. Think about the federal Head Start program or other state-level pre-K programs. We don't tell families using those programs that they must use their pre-K dollars at a residentially assigned government-run provider of pre-K, and that would be absolutely ridiculous for anyone to even suggest that we should do that. Instead, the money goes to the family, and then they can choose public or private, religious or non-religious providers of pre-K services. The money follows the decision of the family. We do the same thing with other industries as well. Think about food stamps. The food stamp funding goes to the family, and then they can choose Walmart or Safeway if they want, but they could also choose Harris Teeter or Trader Joe's or any other provider of groceries. Medicaid dollars, you can use them at private religious Catholic hospitals if you want. If you don't have to take it to a residentially assigned option. So all I'm arguing, and what Governor Reynolds and other lawmakers in the state of Iowa are arguing for, and parents on the ground are arguing for, is to apply the same logic to K-12 education and to fund people as opposed to buildings. And what's interesting to me is a lot of the same people who support these other initiatives that give money to people as opposed to institutions, they get all up in arms about this idea only when it comes to funding students for those in-between years of K-12 education, which raises an important question. Why would that be? And the reality is the only difference here is one of power dynamics. Choice is the norm with higher education and pre-K and just about every other industry in the United States. But choice threatens an entrenched special interest only when it comes to those in-between years of K-12 education. So of course, they fight as hard as possible against any change to the status quo. But that doesn't mean that the status quo or the system should exist in that way. Instead, the funding should follow the child. And thankfully, as I said at the beginning, is that parents are waking up And although for a long time there has only been one powerful special interest group when it comes to K-12 education, that is the employee unions in the government sector, a new special interest group has emerged, and that happens to be parents who want more of a say in their kids' education. And they're pushing back, and politicians are listening to the needs of families and students on the ground. And as I said, we've seen polling numbers surging. We've seen so many states expanding school choice programs. The number of states with education savings account programs, which is the gold standard of school choice, the purest form of funding students directly, or the concept of allowing the money to follow the child, the number of states with those programs actually doubled this year from 5 states to 10 states, and the victories have been monumental at the same time. Think about states like West Virginia. In 2020, West Virginia didn't have any charter schools on the ground, didn't have any programs to allow the money to follow the child to a private school or homeschool setting, but in 2021, they passed the most expansive education savings account program in the nation. Regardless of your income or your background, families will be able to take their children's state-level education dollars to wherever they're getting an education. Again, that could be the public school. If that's the best fit for you, you should absolutely still have that option. But if not, the money could follow the child to a private or homeschool option, or even a micro school, or what people were referring to as pandemic pods over the past couple of years. And the momentum is going to continue, I believe, because in states more so other than Iowa, families felt powerless starting in March of 2020. They were left scrambling, trying to find alternatives, where the government sector was pushing to lobby to keep the schools closed as long as possible, whereas the private sector figured out how to do an adequate version of remote learning and to open as soon as possible to be able to attract and meet the needs of families and students in the best way possible. And the reality is that doesn't mean that the people in the public sector were any less benevolent, or that they didn't have the same level of competence of the private sector. I think the difference was just one of incentives. It's not that the people are better or worse in one sector or the other. Everybody has great intentions. But the difference is one of those sectors receives children's education dollars regardless of whether they open their doors for business. And that's the main problem here, that there's a weird, perverse set of incentives that are baked into the traditional system of schooling all across the nation right now. And the only way to fix that is to attach the funding to the child, to provide bottom-up accountability so that all schools, public and private, have an incentive to cater to the needs of families as opposed to the other way around. In Iowa, for example, the public schools spend over $14,000 per student per year, according to the U.S. Census Bureau in 2019. It's obviously a lot higher now because of the federal bailouts with the COVID relief funding, which amounted nationwide to being at least $3,000 to $4,000 per student. There's a ton of money in the traditional system right now, but average private school tuition in Iowa is less than half of that amount. Well less than half the amount. It's only about $5,000 to $6,000 per student per year. And just imagine if that $14,000 followed the child to pay for a private school or some other type of option. Families would be able to figure it out and to have many more options than they have currently. But as I said, there is a special interest group that pushes back against this. And we saw it last year. We're going to see it this year as well. They're going to push to protect themselves at the expense of families, no matter what, and no matter the cost. And their main argument is going to be that, okay, school choice sounds fine and all, but you see here, they'll say that school choice defunds the public schools. And that's an absolutely ridiculous argument because the money doesn't belong to the public schools in the first place. Education funding is meant for educating children, not for protecting any particular institution, whether that's public or private. The money doesn't belong to the public schools or the private schools. It belongs, or at least it's intended, to benefit the families and their children. No one would ever say that allowing people to choose their grocery store stole money from Walmart. No one would ever say that because we all understand, even if you're using taxpayer funding through like food stamps or another program, the money belongs to the family, and they can take the money to Walmart if they want, but they could also take the money to Safeway or Trader Joe's. The money follows the decision of the family, and we don't get into this argument about stealing money from one institution over the other because we know that the money doesn't belong to the buildings. It belongs to the families. No one would ever say that Pell Grants for higher education steal money from community colleges. That just wouldn't make sense because we all understand that the money is intended to benefit the student and their family. And we should apply the same logic to K to 12 education. In fact, in that way, school choice doesn't steal money from public schools. If anything, public schools defund families. That doesn't mean that they're bad people in the system or that they have bad intentions. It's just the reality that school choice initiatives simply return the money to the hands of the rightful owners, or at least the intended beneficiaries. And my second response to their argument, that's a tired argument they repeated every single year, is that think about what is going on in the mind of that knee-jerk reaction that allowing families to choose something else is going to defund their institution. Well, why would giving families a choice defund your institution? Why would it defund public schools if the public schools are meeting the needs of families? They're essentially admitting that they understand that several families are not happy with what they're getting in the current system. And that doesn't mean that all public schools are bad, but there are particular ones that might not just be the right fit for a particular family, and they understand that families aren't getting what they want for whatever reason. And that's not an argument to force kids into the traditional system. That's an argument for school choice, not against it. And my last response to this defunding argument from the other side is that, as I said earlier, the funding that follows the child with these programs tends to be about half of what you spend in the public schools. I believe the proposal last year might have been about $6,000 per kid, the state level portion of the funding. Well, if the public schools spend $14,000, and actually probably much more now per student per year, mathematically that means when you lose a student to your competition, the public schools actually get to keep thousands of dollars for students who are no longer there, and they financially benefit on a per pupil basis because they get to keep that money for even after the students leave. I mean, think about it this way. Just imagine if Walmart were able to keep half of your grocery bill in perpetuity after you started shopping at Trader Joe's. That wouldn't make any sense, but it would be a good deal for Walmart. And I similarly argue that education savings account programs and other school choice initiatives allowing the funding to follow the child financially benefit the public schools as well. This is a win-win situation, especially when you think about the fact that competition leads to better outcomes in every industry, including education. And we have tons of evidence on this. I believe you have someone from EdChoice there as well. They do a great job at summarizing the research on school choice. If you look at the EdChoice 1, 2, 3s, they've documented every study that exists on private school choice competition and what happens in the public schools. 27 studies exist on the topic. It's one of the clearest strands of evidence in the school choice literature. 25 of the 27 studies find statistically significant positive effects of school choice competition on the kids who remain in the public schools. So in this sense, school choice and competition is a rising tide that lifts all boats. Everybody wins, and we should all be able to get behind this, especially when you think about how even the teachers in the traditional system are missing out because of how resources are allocated over time. Ben Scafferty put out a report called Back to the Staffing Surge a couple of years ago, where he looked at the funding nationwide and found that between 1992 and 2014, per pupil education expenditures actually increased in real terms after adjusting for inflation by 27%. Teacher salaries actually dropped by 2% over the same period in real terms after adjusting for inflation. And that's because the traditional system does not have a strong incentive to cater to the needs of families or the employees in the system. And so they push towards things like bloated administrative bloat and staffing surges, which might be great for the union bosses, but not so great for the teachers on the ground or for the families at the same time. So this literally can be a win-win situation, especially with what we're seeing in Iowa, the type of bill that is introduced last year, and it's probably going to be considered again this year, is that about half the funding would follow the child. The public schools financially benefit on a per pupil basis. The families benefit from getting more choices. Everybody benefits here. And especially when you start to think about the logic of competition and how when families can vote with their feet, the schools will have an incentive to cater to their needs. This is the strongest form of accountability that exists. The way that I've put it before is that, in general, underperforming private schools shut down. Underperforming traditional schools oftentimes get more money because they can go back to the government and say, well, we're doing a bad job because we need more money. The incentives are completely backwards in the traditional system, but they don't have to be. And the way out of this mess in the current system is to allow the funding to follow the child so that families can be empowered to choose the best options for them. One last thing I'll hit on is that COVID really exposed a lot of the problems in the current system. That's not a knock on any particular school or specific school or type of school or the employees in that system. But at the same time, parents got to see the response of that special interest group and how it sought to protect itself at the expense of families over and over again. This didn't happen as much in Iowa, but we're seeing it play out in Chicago with the strike vote just last night. So this is a real nationwide issue, and if we don't fix it sometime soon, it can get worse all across the country. But I'm optimistic going forward because look, the special interest group has overplayed its hand and awakened a sleeping giant. That happens to be parents who want more of a say in their kids' education. They felt powerless in 2020 and 2021, and in some places in 2022, and those parents are going to push to make sure they never feel powerless ever again. And at the same time, parents care more about their kids' education than anybody else. And they're going to fight to make sure that they have the right to educate their kids as they see fit, harder than anyone will ever fight to take that right away from them. So I'm optimistic for school choice going forward in 2022. We saw 2021 as the year of school choice already. I think we might have a repeat year in 2022 because people's eyes have been opened all across the nation. And I'm particularly optimistic in states like Iowa, where you have extremely great leadership on the ground with the governor and several legislators signing the Education Freedom Pledge already. I believe at least 19 lawmakers have already signed the Education Freedom Pledge in Iowa. It's one of the states that is on fire with support and momentum around this concept of the money following the child and truly empowering parents. And we'll see what happens and what shakes up in 2022. I'm very excited to see what will happen. I'm optimistic, and you guys should be too. Thank you.
Couple minutes to introduce yourselves at the table that you're at and discuss a bit of your reaction to what Corey just had to share. So please introduce yourselves and talk a bit about your reaction to his thoughts. Thank you very much for your discussion. Our next speaker is Mr. Steve Halwarda. He serves as the Vice President of Development for EdChoice and is responsible for donor strategy. He's got 25 years of fundraising experience, and before he did this, he spent 11 years as the Director of Development at Ileana Christian High School in Lansing, Illinois. He was responsible for leading a $25 million capital campaign for that new campus. Steve is a proud graduate of Dordt University and received his master's from Mississippi State University. Steve was scheduled to be here in person today, but after recently vacationing in Abu Dhabi, he tested positive for COVID-19, so he will be joining us via a video.
Hi, everybody. My name is Steve Halwarda. I work for an organization called EdChoice, and I am coming to you live, well recorded, from Dubai today. I really apologize that I can't be there with you in person. That was the plan. I know that was the plan, and I was really looking forward to it and having a great conversation with you today about school choice and particularly ESAs. But my wife and I took a vacation between the holidays over to Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and I tested positive for COVID. So I am stuck here in my hotel room for the next 10 days and enjoying the beautiful four walls around me and having my food delivered on a every couple hour basis. So I am recording this video for you. Again, I apologize that I can't be there live and in person. I think that would have been much more effective, but hopefully you get something out of this anyway. The reason I'm talking to you today is that I believe fully and wholeheartedly in school choice. I am the person I am today because of the Christian education that I received. Christian education just means so much to me. My parents made that choice when I was a child for me and my three sisters. In fact, I think my dad might be in the room today. If so, hi Dad, sorry I can't be there with you for a couple of days, but this video is going to have to work. But it was because of the dedication that he and my mom had to Christian schools that I started really getting into the importance of Christian education specifically. But then as I became an adult, started focusing more on school choice and what it would take to get people and allow people to make the choice that my parents made without having to sacrifice quite as much financially. So that's why I've been working for EdChoice for the last 2 years. That's after a long time working for Ileana Christian High School. I'm sure Josh Bauer told you a little bit about me. I sent him a bio, so that was the plan. Hopefully he did that anyway, so I won't go too deep into that. Anyway, EdChoice is the organization I work for now. We're located in Indianapolis, Indiana, and we work in all 50 states around the country. We focus on school choice. We are the legacy of Milton and Rose Friedman. If those of you that aren't or are aware of Milton Friedman, he was an economist, Nobel Prize winning economist that really focused on free choice and capitalism, and school choice was one of the things that he was really fond of and focused on. And we just celebrated our 25th anniversary last year, and it was, as declared by the Wall Street Journal, the year of school choice. 2021, we saw more programs pass for school choice than ever before. So we're excited about what the future looks like. We're excited for Iowa to get more involved than you already are. I know you've got a tax credit program now, but we certainly would love to see you take a bigger leap and jump into the deep end of the pool with a few others. I was specifically asked to talk a little bit about ESAs. School choice options, they give parents the freedom to choose the best learning environment for their children with the funding that would have been spent by the state on a public school. This ensures that each child receives an excellent education, regardless of race, income, background, or zip code. These programs come in 4 forms typically: ESAs, education savings accounts, vouchers, tax credit scholarships, and individual tax credits and deductions. As you may or may not know, vouchers allow eligible families to send their children to a private school of their choice using all or part of the public funding that was assigned to their child to get that at that private school. Tax credit scholarship programs. Taxpayers receive full or partial credits when they donate to nonprofits that offset the cost of private education. Individual tax credits, of course, are just that. They allow parents to receive some state tax credit tax relief, I should say, from their payment towards private education. And then education savings accounts. We see these as the next generation of school choice. They really are kind of the next best thing, I would say. Many of you might be familiar with a healthcare savings account. An education savings account is very similar to that in that you have ESAs allow parents to receive a deposit of public funds into an authorized savings account, very similar to a healthcare savings account. That then, of course, has restricted but multiple uses. It means parents no longer are limited to a choice among schools. They can fully customize their child's education, which we think is really exciting. So it doesn't force you to choose a school, good, bad, and ugly. You can choose multiple organizations or multiple places to get an education for your child. The state would then give parents the restricted use, I'll just quote, debit cards. They're not always a debit card, but something down those lines, loaded with a portion of their children's share of per pupil funds. Again, every state has a designated amount that is assigned to a child, and that amount then, a portion of that would be put onto this debit card. Then you can use those funds to pay for pre-approved educational services and providers, which would include private or Christian school education, the tuition, textbooks, other curriculum, online learning, individual public school classes, and AP courses, amongst many other things. Of course, the limitations here is that those expenses have to be used for educational purposes. As I said, the eligible family receives a restricted use debit card loaded with the allotted funds for your child's education. Eligibility, of course, for programming would be determined by the state. The family uses the card for approved educational expenses. You submit the receipts then back to the administrative agent for the audit to make sure that it was spent on educational costs. And of course, you can only use that card for approved vendors. That would be by the state. Some states have chosen to have nonprofits run this program rather than the state government itself, which we've seen some success there. And we may even lean towards that. It takes a little bit of the control from the state and puts it into your hands, if you will. And then families can roll over funds quarterly sometimes. It really depends on the program that is set up. Each program is different depending on the state, depending on how the legislation is done through the state legislature. So my encouragement to you, of course, is, do your homework on this, find out what it is that you want and fight for it. We've seen states like West Virginia this past year pass the most expansive ESA program in the history of school choice. Up to 95% of students are eligible for the full amount that the state was going to spend on that child for education, where they can now choose wherever they want to send their child to school or for whatever they want to study, which we think is just really exciting. And I think Iowa's close to that. You've got the right people in place, and with this coalition work that you're doing today, I think you've got the right direction going. I just want to close with this last paragraph that I read here, so pardon me while I read this. But in 1962, Milton Friedman wrote, "Not all education is schooling, and not all schooling is education. The proper subject of concern here is education. ESAs are school choice 2.0 because they give parents a choice in schooling options and allow parents to fully tailor their children's educational experience. ESAs are about education, not merely schooling. Universal education savings accounts would be the best in school choice to date because they enable all students to have access to a top-notch customized education that meets their unique learning needs." And this ultimately empowers families and strengthens communities. And I really want to encourage you in this. I wish that I was there in person to answer any questions that you may have. I again apologize that I was not able to do that. But please feel free to reach out to me if you do have any questions. My email is pretty simple. It is Steve, STEVE, at edchoice, EDCHOICE.org. And I'll make sure Josh gets that information to you as attendees as well. Feel free to contact me. I would love to work with you on this. My colleagues and I would really love to see Iowa take that next step. And I, of course, personally care so much about Christian education that I'm excited that this group has gotten together today to work together to find the best solution. So thank you again for this opportunity. I hope to see you all soon. As soon as I can get out of Dubai anyway. Hope to see you soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Hello.
My name's Eric Goranson. I am the lobbyist for the Iowa Association of Christian Schools. I'm a graduate of Des Moines Christian School. My son graduated from Des Moines Christian School. My daughter's a senior at Des Moines Christian School. And I used to work for another Christian school in the metro area, in the Des Moines area, before convincing the Iowa Association of Christian Schools to take a risk on a young green guy like me and become your lobbyist. So this is my 15th year lobbying for you. This will be my 16th legislative session starting on Monday, representing Christian schools, among others. And I know my job is just to introduce the two legislators that are going to be speaking, but I promise, Brad and Josh, I'll just take 60 seconds. Those booklets on your table, Lydia from the Iowa Association of Christian Schools brought those up today. Those are from EdChoice. EdChoice's contact information is in there. The Iowa Association of Christian Schools has had a great 15-year relationship with EdChoice. They've been, if not they have been the most supportive national organization in Iowa on supporting associations like ours on advancing school choice in the state. So we appreciate them. We appreciate Steve. And I was just in Mexico a week ago and could have been in the same boat as he is, staring at four walls for 10 days. So I feel bad for him. Also, Brad mentioned that new legislation this year may seem like a long shot. I don't think it's a long shot. The STOs in 2006, no one expected that. But it was part of a big negotiation on teacher pay increases and came out of, frankly, nowhere in 2005, and then was vetoed and then came back in 2006 and was signed by Governor Vilsack. In 2013, after 7 years of advocacy, we got independent accreditation done. A few months earlier, everyone told us that would be impossible. So with legislators like these who are going to speak to you and advocates like you, I believe we're better positioned this year than we ever have been to move the needle and maybe get this over the finish line. There's no guarantees in the legislative process, but I feel very cautiously optimistic this year, and that's better than I felt in years. So let's start with Skylar. Skylar Wheeler is the vice chair of the Education Committee in the House. I've been privileged to work with him for years. He signed the Ed Freedom Pledge that Corey mentioned earlier. He successfully floor managed a number of school choice and regulatory bills over the years. He's been in our corner every step of the way. More importantly, he's been in the corner of students and parents, not institutions, and that includes particular schools, the Iowa Association of Christian Schools, or public schools. I think he has a very good head on his shoulders about being advocates for kids and their parents, and I appreciate that about him. He's baseball coach at Unity, and he's a legislator for all the right reasons. It's one thing to be principled, but what I like about Skylar is he adds a unique and effective energy to his principled nature, and it gets things done at the Capitol. So join me in welcoming Skylar.
First off, I feel like I shouldn't even speak. That was the nicest thing I've ever heard in my life. Thank you, Eric. I want to thank you guys. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Brad, wherever you are, Brad, for putting this on today. Senator Taylor and I go to a lot of meetings prior to session, and some of them are people trying to pitch us something, right? They want us to take up their cause, or they want us to believe in their issue. Some of them are things we already believe in, and then there's about 3 that we're really excited about. And this is one of those 3. I won't speak for you. You can speak for yourself. It's one of those 3 that I'm very excited about. I want to start today by rewinding. Let's go back to 2018. 2018 was my second year in the legislature. It was my first term. I was a young 24-year-old fired up on all these issues. And Representative Walt Rogers, who's here today, he's had his name thrown out multiple times, was the chair of the House Education Committee, which I sat on. And Walt comes and he goes, "Hey, I've got this big school choice bill. Do you want to sit on the subcommittee?" I said, "Oh yeah, sure. I'm with you on it." I had no idea what was about to happen. We had a subcommittee. To this day, it was the largest attended subcommittee I've ever been a part of, and I've been a part of some pretty heavy, intense issues. And it was also the one filled with the most anger. And the reason it was filled with the most anger was because you had an institution, you had a system that was being threatened. And when that system was threatened, people came out with anger like you would never believe. We watched during that subcommittee as about 5 different groups. Eric was there. Americans for Prosperity were there. I came out in support of this bill. And then we heard word after word after word after word of the same talking points from people objecting to this legislation. And they'd say two things. The first thing they'd say is they'd say, our public schools are great. This bill is bad for Iowa. The second thing they would say almost in the same breath was, if you pass this bill, you are going to destroy public schools. So obviously it doesn't take a genius to put two and two together. If the public schools are great, why is this bill a threat, right? And I'm not here today to trounce on public schools, but the reality of the situation is they know there are parents and there are students that need a different setting and they don't have the financial means to make it work. As Eric said, I do believe very heavily in parents and I believe very heavily in students, and every student is unique. I can see it in my two kids. My daughter, she is definitely different from my son. There's no question about it. And we can tell that even at the different ages and the stages that they're in. I want to give you guys an example of what school choice legislation has done in the state. As Eric alluded to, I've ran a number of different pieces of legislation in this area. This last year, we passed a bill eliminating voluntary diversity plans, and I won't get into the nerdiness of that. But basically, you had 5 school districts that said certain kids could not open and roll out based off of, things that they could not control. So I'm going to read you guys, if you will, a couple of headlines that have come out since we passed that. First headline from the Waterloo Cedar Falls Courier. Diversity plans demise blame for expected drop in Waterloo schools enrollment. They had over 100 kids that were now eligible to leave that school district left the minute they could. Another one from Davenport. Davenport schools say 157 additional students have open enrolled since the state ended voluntary diversity plans. So this idea that they're fitting the needs of all their students and our public schools are great and this bill is not necessary, we're seeing in a smaller scale, just with 5 school districts, people that weren't able to take their kids out of those schools exercising their right to do so. And I want to talk too about this unique story I had where I met this mom in Des Moines. And they brought her to the Capitol, and I listened to her story. She's a Hispanic. There was a little bit of a barrier there, but we were able to get through it. And she talked about a situation in which her daughter was raped in the Des Moines public school system. Okay, she was legitimately raped. It actually was published online. Wasn't supposed to be published. It was published online. She had no way to get her kid out of that school district. She didn't have the financial means, and she wasn't able to open and roll out. And I watched this mom bawling her eyes out in front of me. And I thought to myself, what a ridiculous system, what a ridiculous state that we live in, where we can't find a way to get this mom and empower her to get her kid to a different school. And then we go into the pandemic, right? And Brad talked about it. We go into the pandemic. And if my wife was here, she could tell you, she could back it up. Phone call after phone call after phone call. Sioux Center, West Line, wherever it was, Lamar's, in the area, people I didn't even represent. Phone call after phone call. What do I do? What are we going to do? How do I educate my kid? How do I go to work? Right? Corey talked about, I think he talked about on Fox News one time about the labor shortage that resulted from that. We get into the next school year. Phone call after phone call. They're trying to force my kids to wear masks going to school. My kid doesn't, my senior in high school doesn't get to play football this weekend because of contact tracing. He's asymptomatic, et cetera, et cetera. And parents that were frustrated, but didn't have the ability, they didn't have the empowerment or the financial means to get their kids out of that school and into one of the private schools that weren't doing these things. So I know I'm probably supposed to give a legislative update. I'm sorry, this is an issue I'm very passionate about, and I wanted to get through some of this, but I'm going to leave you guys with 2 more points. Number 1, we have the Iowa tuition grant, right? We have Dort here. The Iowa tuition grant, what's it eligible for? Who's eligible for it, right? It's our private schools. That's literal tax dollars, and I don't know the dollar amount, $6,500 or something like that per student. Literal tax dollars that go to private schools, which include people that are teaching the gospel. And I'll say this as I finish. I told Dr. Bauer I was going to do it, and I am working on it and do it. It is my intention this year, as I've looked at the House and looked in the Iowa House, there's been a lot of work going into trying to get us to get there on the issue, right? I think the Senate's there. The governor's solidly there. I just talked to her office last week, and they're ready to go pretty strong on this issue. It's been the House that's been the problem. Guys that are convinced that, it's going to destroy their rural school. Their rural school is the biggest employer in said town or whatever it is. And so I had prayed about it a little bit and had several conversations. I said, I think the only way we're going to get this thing through is if we go for it. We go big or we go home. And so I have asked for a bill that would be 100% of the students, 100% of the state dollars, which doesn't just include state supplemental aid, it includes those categoricals, the early interventions, the teacher leadership supplements. And I believe that it'll build us the best opportunity to get something through, hopefully something legitimate that's good, because we start at the top. We go, this is our goal, this is what we want. We don't start something small, we don't start narrow, we go to the top and we say, we want to go for broke and make them work us down if they have to. But ladies and gentlemen, as I sit here, this is one of those issues that continues to fire me up and continues to get me down in the legislature pushing for it, and I will continue to push for it. I ask for your prayers and also the prayers for the governor as she decides ultimately on how she wants to word and how big she wants to go on this bill that she will likely talk about on Tuesday. So thank you guys again. Thank you for having us. I appreciate the time.
Well, he admitted the house was a problem, so I don't have to do that. That's good. Next up is Senator Jeff Taylor. He's a fellow educator, which makes him among a handful of legislators in the Capitol building in Des Moines at any given moment who really understands what it's like to be in a school and be in a classroom. He's vice chair of Education Committee in the Senate, also signed the Ed Freedom Pledge, and is an articulate advocate for our kids in public and private schools. I'm still getting to know Senator Taylor, but it doesn't take very long to realize that he's exactly the type of person you want representing you in the Iowa Senate. So those of you who have him as a senator, I think you're very fortunate. So please welcome Senator Taylor.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Josh, also for inviting me. It's a privilege and honor to be here and to be in this position to be able to share my thoughts and also advocate for school choice, parental choice at the Capitol. I am somebody who, as an educator myself, professor at Dort, and as somebody who attended K through 12 schools in Northwest Iowa, public schools, I'm somebody who has cared about education for many, many years. And I was privileged to be able to vote for the Education Savings Account Scholarship Bill that passed the Senate, as mentioned earlier. It was something that, although it was very limited in scope, it basically targeted schools, about a dozen schools that were listed as failing schools or underperforming schools based on federal standards. Even though it was something that was very limited, we were deluged on the Senate side, and I know the House was as well, by people who were outraged. And I think it was primarily the teachers union in the state of Iowa that generated most of those emails, thousands of emails over the course of 2-3 week period. So I do want to thank all of you who wrote in, who took the time or at least supplied your name to different groups to write in encouragement for those of us who supported ESA and that bill. It helped offset a little bit some of the criticism, the doom and gloom, the sky is going to fall, outrage that was generated from the other side. It's also great to see such a good turnout here today. It's good to see a lot of friends of mine who are associated not only with Dort, but also some of the schools that my kids have attended through the years, Sioux Center Christian, Orange City Christian, Unity Christian. I want to thank Western Christian for hosting this event. We have so many good options in Northwest Iowa, and unfortunately that's not true many places in the state. And hopefully the ESA bill or something that is similar to that is going to help expand not only Christian schools, but just private options in general for the students of Iowa. I am a supporter of school choice or parental choice, and I have three main reasons for supporting it. Number one, children belong to their parents. Children do not belong to any government, any system, any organization. They belong to their parents. Secondly, a one-size-fits-all approach to education conflicts with the fact that the needs of school-aged children are not all the same. And lastly, number three, competition is usually a healthy thing that drives accountability and improvement across the board. I'm going to continue to support a educational reform, school choice, and I do expect that there is going to be a major bill coming along in 2022. So I'm cautiously optimistic. as Representative Wheeler mentioned, the governor is on board. She's a strong advocate for school choice. And I think we're going to see something coming our way again. On the Senate side, I got to say that vote, we lost 2 or 3 of the Republican senators who voted no on that bill. We had such a sizable majority. It was basically a 31-18 split. This coming session, we're going to have a 32-18 split in the Senate if we're all there. So we were able to lose a few people, but our caucus behind closed doors, leadership, Senator Whitfer, who does an excellent job as the majority leader in the Senate, President Chapman on the Senate side, and the chair of the Education Committee, Senator Sinclair, the emphasis was on unity. And we were told, and I certainly agreed with this, that this is a priority bill, not only for the governor, but for Senate Republicans. So in the end, we were able to pass it, and I look forward to voting for a similar bill, or hopefully a more expansive bill, coming up this next session. I will also say, as somebody who is an educator and who attended K-12 public schools in Iowa, I also will continue to support public education. I want public education to be well funded. I also want it to be accountable to parents and to taxpayers. I want an ESA approach that helps both students who leave public schools, but also students who remain in public schools. And Corey Deangelis addressed some of those concerns in the comments he made in a very a nice manner, I think. I am not somebody that you're going to ever hear sneering at public schools, public teachers, public school administrators or staff. That's not me. I'm not going to bash them. I'm not going to demonize them. I'm somebody who recognizes that in the end, even if we have a much more wide ESA bill passed in the state of Iowa, the majority of the students in the state are probably going to still be attending public schools. And so that is something that we should not minimize, and I don't think there's any reason to underfund that. Throwing money at a problem is not automatically going to solve it. I think, at least from the Republican point of view, that's kind of a common sense approach, but at the same time, we want them to be adequately funded. And just thinking about this last session, we allocated over $100 million for public education in the state of Iowa. That's K-12, but also higher education. So I don't think it's underfunded, but that's something that remains a concern. And I'm just going to close by saying that, to me, going beyond public policy, going beyond debates in the political realm, this question of how should parents be able to educate their children and how should that financing happen, to me, that's something that goes much deeper. It goes to the question of freedom, of liberty. And this is a gift from God himself. From the very beginning, through creation, free will was baked into it. And we are given freedom by God, even to make the wrong choices, right? In a sinful world, that happens at times. Now, there's limits to freedom. Freedom isn't everything. It's not the only value that matters. There's other things that matter. There's morality, there's justice, there's truth, there's community. So freedom is not isolated from the other values in life that matter. And sometimes, if a person wants to exercise their freedom in a way that egregiously harms others, then government needs to step in and say no. So we know there's limits to freedom, but freedom is a good thing. And freedom is tied to diversity, which is a good word that progressives like to use selectively, but diversity is a good thing. And it makes me think, in closing, of Abraham Kuyper. In the late 1800s, one of the speeches that he gave that went into print had to do with what he called the curse of modern life. And this is modern in the late 1800s. It's even more true today than when he spoke it and wrote it back then. And he said that the curse was uniformity, this idea that one size fits all, that everybody needs to be on the same page, and the power of government was going to be used to coerce people to stay onto that same page. Oh, in this COVID era, the last 2 years, we've seen how that's played out. I think in oftentimes an overreaction and in a very harmful way. Right? So what he recommended was pluriformity, as he called it. It's not a word that rolls off the tongue, but he was really saying it's freedom, it's diversity, it's recognizing that God created human beings and nature in general with a wide variety, and government ought to respect that. And so to me, I see the idea of parental choice or school choice as going along with creational design and norms that God has given us. And I I look forward to advancing that ball as much as I can in the coming legislative session. Thank you.
All right. Eric, would you like to make one more final call to action? Any other final thoughts? A lot of these people have so much to talk about, and they could talk for 24 hours if we let them. So we'll give you the mic a little longer.
Yeah, I have another hour, right? Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah. Really, before we split for that, my time's up. Couple things. Please make sure, if you want to do it now, you won't offend me by being on your phone while I'm talking. Go to iowachristianschools.org and sign up for our email newsletter list. Right on the right side of the page, near the top, it says sign up or action center, and you can sign up for our emails. iowachristianschools.org. We are the only organization in the state of Iowa specifically tailored to represent the mission and the unique needs of Iowa's Protestant, biblically based, Christ-centered schools. And you are going to get action alerts and information from us during the legislative session that will align with what your schools are teaching your kids and what you want for your family and what we want from the state. So make sure you sign up for those emails. Secondly, use our Action Center on our website and react to alerts that come out. You may get them from your school, you may get them directly from us. But generally, they're going to point to the Iowa Association of Christian Schools Action Center. Man, it is so easy to do, and it is so effective. We have gotten really good over the years of creating an email system where you can either design your own email or use some suggested verbiage, which yours will be different from your neighbors who click on the same system, which is really nice. And then you can personalize it and make it your own and send it off by putting in your address. Takes 35 seconds to 5 or 10 minutes, depending on how personalized you want to make this email, but it goes a long way. When we ask you to use that system to email your representative and email your senator in the heat of the moment, you heard Senator Taylor said that he was grateful for the emails that he got during that time. Many of those emails came from our system. Many of those emails came from the Catholic Conference. Many of those came from Iowa ACE and others, but together, we can help offset some of those talking points and some of those, some of the opposition that our legislators feel. It only takes a few people in every district to email their legislator before they really start to pay attention. Am I wrong? At some point, you extrapolate that out and you think, if these 3 people emailed me today, there are another 300 or 400 who feel the same way today. And so your willingness to click those links and take action, you're not just speaking for yourself and your family, you're actually speaking for a statistical sample in your district. You have an outsized voice when you actually take the opportunity to email your legislators. So please do that. And finally, sign up for the emails on iowachristianschools.org. React to the emails you get from us during the session. We won't spam you and we won't send a whole lot of junk your way. So when you see Iowa Association of Christian Schools, you know it means something, it's important. Don't delete it. But finally, if you really want an A+ in advocacy this year from the Iowa Association of Christian Schools, you will get on our website right now, and after you sign up for those emails, in the Action Alert Center, before we ever send you anything, there are tools in there to email your representative and your senator right now before session even starts. And email your representative, email your senator sometime between now and the end of the weekend, and let them know that you're excited about school choice this session, you support a universal education savings account, and ask your legislator how they're going to help advocate for you and your family to get it done. We need you to do that. If you do that this week, that is just a huge jump start on our advocacy moving forward. So thank you.
And one more round of applause for Brad Viss and Josh Bauer for creating this opportunity for us all. My name's Brian Verwolf. I'm the head of school at Western Christian. It's been a pleasure to host you today. You're invited to stick around for lunch and fellowship together. After lunch, there will be a closed session in a different space with school leaders. Board members, you may join us. School administrators, we'd like to see all of you there if you can. But before we eat, I'd love to thank our Lord for the food we're going to eat. Let's pray. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, we gather before you before we're about to eat, and we're grateful for every choice you give us, Lord, and we pray that we discern well and we do it in fellowship with one another in a positive and collaborative way. Thank you for making us in your image, for making each of us unique and distinct. And Lord, we are sorry for the times we've failed to glorify you. Thank you for the food we're about to eat. May we enjoy fellowship together, and thank you for the minds and the passion behind school choice. It's in your name I pray. Amen. Thanks again for being here. Enjoy the meal. We're going to start with this round table over here, and then we'll just kind of, so you guys got to get up and go in the front of the line, and then we'll just cycle that way, okay? Thank you.